The very person who makes you feel most seen is the same person who's teaching you to disappear. You think you can spot a narcissist by their lies. But what if I told you they don't just hide their shadow, they make you carry it? Remember the first time you met them. That magnetic pull wasn't attraction, it was recognition. Your shadow meeting theirs in a dance you didn't know you were choreographing. They didn't just charm you. They rearranged your reality so quietly you stopped trusting the voice that whispered, "Something's wrong." You called it empathy, but maybe it was the way you learned to disappear. There's a moment, maybe you felt it, when you're talking to someone and suddenly you're not yourself anymore. You're performing a version of you that feels safer, smaller, more acceptable. Meet Meredith, a 32-year-old marketing director. She's brilliant, intuitive, the one her friends call when they need someone who really listens. But at work, when her boss walks into the room, something shifts. Her voice gets higher. Her ideas become questions. Her presence shrinks. She doesn't know it yet, but she's living split in two. There's the Meredith who knows things, who feels the tension in the room before anyone speaks, who sees through the performance. And there's the Meredith who pretends not to know, who smiles when her gut screams, who agrees when her soul rebels. Carl Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to survive in the world. But what happens when that mask becomes a prison? Meredith's boss, Jerry, has what you might call dead eyes. When he speaks, there's warmth in his words, but coldness behind his gaze. He compliments her work in meetings, then undermines it in private. He asks about her weekend with genuine seeming interest, then uses what she shares to make jokes that sting. And here's the thing that haunts her: part of her craves his approval. Even knowing he's playing a game, even feeling sick after their interactions, there's this desperate part of her that thinks, maybe if I just prove myself enough, he'll finally see me. But what Meredith doesn't understand yet is that Jerry isn't the problem. Jerry is the mirror. You see, narcissists don't create your wounds, they find them. They have an uncanny ability to locate the exact spot where you've been broken before, where you've learned that love comes with conditions, where you've decided that who you really are isn't enough. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said, "What you reject in yourself, you meet in the other as fate." Meredith's shadow, the part of her that's hungry for recognition, that would do anything to be chosen, that secretly believes she's not worthy of unconditional love. That's what Jerry feeds on. The split runs deeper than you might think. There's the public Meredith who nods when Jerry takes credit for her ideas, and the private Meredith who goes home and rage cleans her apartment. There's the professional Meredith who says, "No problem," when he changes the deadline for the third time, and the authentic Meredith who feels her stomach drop each time she betrays herself. But here's what makes it so insidious. The split happened so long ago, she can barely remember when it started. Maybe it was the teacher in 3rd grade who loved her when she was quiet and helpful, but went cold when she spoke up. Maybe it was the parent who praised her for being easy and withdrew when she had needs. Maybe it was the first heartbreak that taught her that love was something you earned by being perfect. The persona isn't just a mask. It's a survival strategy that worked once, maybe for years. But now it's become a cage, and Jerry holds the key because he knows exactly which bars to rattle. Jung understood that what we push into the shadow doesn't disappear. It goes underground and gets hungry. Meredith's shadow holds her rage at being unseen, her desperate need to matter, her bone-deep fear that she's fundamentally flawed. And Jerry, with the intuition of a predator, feeds these hungers just enough to keep them alive, but never enough to satisfy them. When he gives her that warm smile and says, "Meredith, you really get it?" he's not just complimenting her. He's throwing scraps to the starving part of her that believes she only matters when someone else says she does. The split isn't just between Meredith and Jerry. It's between the Meredith who knows and the Meredith who performs, between the truth she feels and the story she tells herself, between her authentic power and her adapted survival. And every time she chooses the mask over the truth, she teaches him exactly where to press. What part of yourself do you hide when certain people are watching? What truth do you swallow to keep the peace? The manipulation isn't just external. It's the war between the part of you that knows and the part of you that needs to be needed. Between your intuition and your conditioning. Between your soul's voice and your persona's performance. This is where the real game is played, not in their lies, but in your split, not in their mask, but in the civil war happening inside you every time you choose safety over truth. Here's what they don't tell you about spotting manipulation. It's not about catching them in lies. It's about catching yourself in the lie that you need their version of you to be true. Let me show you what I mean. When someone is lying, they don't just change their words, they change their energy. Watch their hands. Liars often touch their face, their neck, their mouth, unconsciously trying to contain the deception. But here's the deeper tell: they overcompensate with warmth. A genuine person's warmth feels consistent, like sunlight. A manipulator's warmth feels like a spotlight, intense, focused, and designed to blind you to everything else. Jerry Meredith's boss does this perfectly. When he wants something, his voice gets softer, his compliments more specific. "Meredith, you have such a unique perspective on client relationships. I was just telling Jennifer how impressed I am with your emotional intelligence." The words sound like gold, but listen to the undertone. There's no genuine curiosity about her thoughts. There's no space for her to disagree or add nuance. It's not a conversation. It's a download of exactly what he needs her to believe about herself, so she'll give him what he wants. But here's the real kicker, and this is where Carl Jung's shadow work becomes crucial. Meredith isn't being manipulated because she's naive. She's being manipulated because part of her is collaborating. There's a part of Meredith that would rather believe the lie than face the truth that she's been performing for love her entire life. That she learned somewhere along the way that her authentic self wasn't enough. That she's been choosing the crumbs of conditional approval over the feast of self-acceptance. Think about the last time someone flattered you right before asking for a favor. In that moment, didn't part of you want to believe the flattery was genuine? Didn't part of you choose to ignore the timing, the context, the slightly too perfect phrasing? That's not stupidity. That's your shadow collaborating with theirs. The moment you stop needing their version of you to be true, something shifts. You start seeing the performance for what it is. You notice the timing of their compliments, always right before they need something. You feel the subtle ways they test your boundaries, not to respect them, but to map them for future invasion. Here's what Meredith learned to watch for the micro moment when Jerry's mask slipped. It happened in the space between her saying no and him adjusting his strategy. Just a flash, maybe half a second, where the warmth disappeared from his eyes and something calculating took its place. Manipulators live in this constant state of performance, but the effort shows. Watch for the moments when they think you're not looking. Watch how they treat the server when you're at lunch. Watch how they speak about people who can't benefit them. Watch what happens to their face when they think the conversation is over. But more importantly, watch yourself. Watch how you hold your breath when they walk into the room. Watch how you automatically start performing fine even when you're not. Watch how you edit your truth in real time to make it more palatable for them. This is where it gets uncomfortable. Because recognizing manipulation in others forces you to recognize the ways you manipulate yourself. Every time Meredith stays silent, when Jerry takes credit for her ideas, she's manipulating herself into believing that keeping the peace is more important than honoring her truth. Every time she laughs at his cutting jokes, she's gaslighting herself into thinking his disrespect is somehow acceptable. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But becoming who you truly are means facing who you've been pretending to be. It means acknowledging the ways you've abandoned yourself in exchange for acceptance. Here's a practice that will change everything. Start paying attention to how you feel in your body during and after interactions with certain people. With genuine people, even difficult conversations leave you feeling more solid, more real. You might be challenged, but you feel seen. With manipulators, you feel disoriented. You question yourself. You feel like you just got off a carnival ride that spins you around until you can't tell which way is up. This isn't weakness. This is your nervous system trying to tell you something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. Meredith started noticing this after particularly intense meetings with Jerry. She'd feel accomplished in the moment, like she'd finally proven herself. But within hours, a strange anxiety would creep in. She'd replay the conversation, analyzing every word, wondering what she could have said differently. That's the telltale sign. When you leave an interaction and immediately start editing yourself, you've just encountered someone who profits from your self-doubt. Manipulators don't lie once and move on. They lie consistently, systematically, strategically. They tell you they value your input, then interrupt you mid-sentence. They say they trust your judgment, then micromanage every decision. They claim to want your honest opinion, then punish you when you give it. But here's what's revolutionary about this awareness. You start seeing these same patterns in yourself. How often do you tell yourself you'll set a boundary, then cave the moment it's tested? How often do you say you value your own opinion, then immediately defer to someone else's? The outer manipulation is just a reflection of the inner civil war between who you really are and who you think you need to be to survive. Carl Jung understood that we don't see people as they are. We see them through the lens of our own unconscious material. What we can't stand in others is often what we can't accept in ourselves. What we're drawn to in others is often what we've disowned in ourselves. Meredith was drawn to Jerry's confidence because she'd buried her own. She was repelled by his manipulation because she couldn't face the ways she manipulated herself. She was fascinated by his seeming freedom to take up space because she'd spent a lifetime learning to shrink. The moment you recognize that every person in your life is showing you something about yourself, the game changes. You stop trying to fix them and start asking, what is this interaction teaching me about where I betray myself? Here's the question that changes everything. Who am I when I'm not performing for their approval? Not who do they need you to be, not who would make this easier, not who would avoid conflict, but who are you really underneath all the adaptation and performance and desperate attempts to be chosen? That person, the real you, is who they can't manipulate, because that person doesn't need their validation to exist. The real shift happens when you stop trying to outsmart them and start aligning with yourself. Meredith's breakthrough came on a Tuesday. Jerry called her into his office with that familiar warmth that wasn't warmth. "Meredith, I need you to handle the Peterson account. I know it's not ideal timing with your current workload, but I have complete faith in your abilities." In the past, Meredith would have felt that cocktail of pride and panic. Pride that he chose her panic about the impossible timeline. She would have said yes immediately, then spent the next 3 days resenting him while working nights to make it happen. But this time, something was different. She felt the familiar tug toward performance, toward proving herself worthy of his confidence. But instead of immediately responding, she paused. "That's a significant project," she said simply. "Let me look at my current commitments and get back to you with a realistic timeline." The shift in Jerry's energy was immediate. The warm mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something colder underneath. "I thought you'd be excited about the opportunity. Jennifer mentioned she could take it on if you're not interested." There it was, the threat disguised as an option. The manufactured competition. The subtle message that her worth was conditional on her compliance. In the past, this would have sent Meredith into panic mode. But now she recognized it for what it was: bait. A hook designed to catch the part of her that was still hungry for approval. Jennifer would be a great choice for that, Meredith heard herself saying. She's got more bandwidth right now. This is what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold paradox without collapsing into reaction. Meredith was learning to hold both her desire to be valued and her commitment to valuing herself, both her empathy for Jerry's position and her clarity about her own boundaries. The key wasn't becoming invulnerable. It was becoming whole enough that she didn't need his approval to feel complete. That night, Meredith tried something Jung recommended, dialoguing with the part of herself that still wanted Jerry's approval. She wrote out a conversation. "What are you afraid will happen if he doesn't choose you for important projects? That I'll become invisible, that I'll be forgotten, that I'll prove I'm not as valuable as I thought. And if that were true, then what? Then I'd have to find another way to matter. What if you already matter, regardless of what he thinks?" The conversation continued, but something had shifted. The desperate part of her that craved external validation was still there, but it was no longer driving the bus. Meredith developed a practice for interactions with Jerry and others like him. Feel. What's happening in my body right now? Pause. What would my authentic response be if I weren't trying to manage their reaction? Choose. How can I honor both my truth and my discernment? This wasn't about becoming confrontational or aggressive. It was about becoming real. It was about showing up as herself, even when herself wasn't what others preferred. Jung saw individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, as the fundamental task of human life. For Meredith, learning to say no without inner collapse wasn't just about work boundaries. It was about psychological freedom. Every time she honored her authentic response instead of her conditioned response, she was choosing her real self over her performed self. Every time she trusted her inner knowing over external pressure, she was reclaiming territory that had been occupied by others' expectations. The manipulation didn't stop. Jerry continued to use the same tactics. But something in Meredith had become untouchable. She was no longer playing the game that required her to betray herself to win. The strangest thing about healing from manipulation isn't learning to trust others again. It's learning to trust yourself. To trust that the voice inside you that says something's wrong isn't just anxiety or paranoia. To trust that your boundaries aren't selfishness. to trust that your truth matters even when it's inconvenient for others. Sarah found herself in this delicate space of rebuilding. She'd learned to recognize the patterns, to feel the energy shifts, to pause before reacting. But now came the deeper work, learning to trust her own perceptions again. Jung spoke of the psyche as having thresholds, places where the conscious mind meets the unconscious, where the inner world meets the outer world. You are the gatekeeper of these thresholds. You decide what gets to enter your psychic space and what stays outside. Sarah started thinking of herself as the guardian of her own inner house. Before automatically letting someone's opinion, demand, or emotional state through the door, she would pause and ask, "Is this mine to carry? Does this serve my highest good? Does this honor who I'm becoming?" This wasn't about becoming cold or disconnected. It was about becoming discerning. It was about loving herself enough to protect the tender parts that were still healing. She developed a practice of checking in with herself throughout the day. How am I feeling in my body right now? What am I noticing about the energy in this room or conversation, relationship? Where am I abandoning myself to keep the peace? What would it look like to honor my truth in this moment? These weren't philosophical questions. They were practical tools for staying connected to herself in a world that often rewards disconnection. The revelation that changed everything was this: boundaries aren't walls you build to keep others out. They're the loving container you create for your authentic self to exist within. When Sarah said no to David's unreasonable requests, she wasn't punishing him. She was protecting something precious, her own integrity, her own sanity, her own soul. When she stopped automatically saying yes to invitations that depleted her, she wasn't being antisocial. She was being pro-self. This is where Carl Jung's shadow work becomes not just psychological theory, but lived practice. Sarah began to see that the parts of herself she'd hidden, her anger at being taken advantage of, her need for recognition, her desire to be special, weren't weaknesses to overcome. They were energies to integrate. Her anger became discernment. Her need for recognition became a commitment to recognizing herself. Her desire to be special became the understanding that she already was special, not because of what she did, but because of who she was. The people who had manipulated her didn't disappear from her life overnight, but her relationship to them transformed completely. She no longer needed them to be different. She no longer needed to convince them of her worth. She no longer needed to win their game. She had found her way back to herself. Here's the secret they don't want you to know. You don't beat a narcissist by being more cunning. You transcend the game they need you to play. You don't spot every liar by perfecting your detective skills. You become unmanipulatable by becoming whole. The moment you stop performing empathy and start receiving it, from yourself first and always, is the moment the hooks lose their hold. Carl Jung understood something profound. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. The manipulation was never about them. It was about the part of you that believed you needed their approval to exist, their validation to matter, their version of you to be real. But you were real before they arrived. You'll be real after they leave. And you're real right now in this moment as you remember who you were before the world taught you to forget. If this resonated with your soul, let me know in the comments. And if you're ready for more shadow work that feels like coming home to yourself, subscribe for the journey ahead. The mirror isn't showing you who they are. It's showing you who you're becoming. And who you're becoming is magnificent.